I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The confrontation began with a door closing inside Windsor Castle, and the sound carried more weight than any public announcement. Sophie entered the private sitting room without an aide, faced Camilla across a narrow table, and delivered a warning no senior royal had dared to say aloud. The campaign against Catherine had gone too far, and it was ending that night. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Sophie did not sit. She remained standing as the Queen watched her with disbelief, waiting for hesitation that never came. The trusted confidant had spent weeks telling herself the altered schedules were mistakes, the missing invitations were temporary, and the reassigned patronages were part of Catherine's return. Then she saw handwritten notes removed from an official planning folder moments before a palace briefing, a formal meeting where senior aides prepared decisions and messages for upcoming royal duties. In that instant, patience became anger. Camilla dismissed the concern as administration. She insisted that 3 engagements had been delayed for practical reasons, and accused Sophie of entering a matter beyond her place. Yet the woman across from her knew why those engagements mattered. They would mark Catherine's return to visible service, reassure the public, and confirm that her voice still carried authority inside the family. Weakening that role during a vulnerable period was not simple management. It felt like betrayal. Sophie placed a copied scheduling memorandum on the table. A memorandum is an internal instruction used to record or direct official action, and this one carried a devastating order. No new engagement involving Catherine could be confirmed without Camilla's personal approval. The Queen reached forward, but Sophie covered the page with her hand. Her voice stayed low, as she revealed that another copy had already been delivered to William's office. Silence tightened between them. Camilla slowly removed her reading glasses and placed them beside the document. She asked whether Sophie understood the consequences of challenging the Queen directly. The trusted confidant felt her hands tremble, but she refused to withdraw them. "I understand the consequences of remaining silent." That answer changed the room. Sophie warned that Catherine's authority must be restored immediately, or the memorandum would go to Charles and William. The monarch's wife stared back, realizing this was no private complaint she could contain. But she still did not know where the resistance had truly begun. To understand why Sophie was prepared to risk her place inside the royal circle, the story must return to the 3 women whose relationships had quietly divided the palace long before that Windsor door closed. This was never simply a disagreement about schedules or ceremonial duties. Behind every altered engagement stood 3 women carrying 3 very different burdens. Catherine, struggling to reclaim her voice; Sophie, torn between loyalty and conscience; and Camilla, guarding the influence she had spent decades fighting to secure. Their conflict was royal in scale, but painfully human at its core. Catherine felt that pressure every time another engagement shifted beyond her control. Her gradual return mattered, because each appearance reassured the public that she remained present, resilient, and ready to help shape the monarchy's future. A royal engagement is an official public duty carried out on behalf of the crown, and losing control of those duties meant losing part of her voice. Sophie understood that fear because she had quietly supported her through months of uncertainty, protecting charitable work, sharing family updates, and making sure important causes were not forgotten. Catherine finally admitted the truth after a family luncheon. She sat beside the trusted confidant, turning an untouched teacup between her hands, and confessed that another engagement had disappeared from her schedule without warning. The princess said she no longer knew which decisions were truly hers. Worse, she felt like a guest inside the institution she was expected to help lead. Sophie heard the sadness beneath the calm, and loyalty suddenly became painful. Sophie knew speaking out could damage relationships built over years. She cared deeply for Catherine, yet she also carried duties to Charles and Camilla. The king had trusted her steady judgment, while the Queen had long treated her as a dependable member of the inner circle. Choosing one side could fracture both bonds. Remaining silent, however, meant watching someone vulnerable become smaller inside her own role. Camilla carried a fear of her own. She reviewed photographs from a recent royal reception and paused at one image of Catherine, surrounded by smiling guests. When an aide mentioned the overwhelming public response, the Queen Consort closed the folder without comment. Her concern was not simply popularity. William's household, the separate team managing the Prince and Princess of Wales, was becoming strong enough to operate without her influence, threatening to leave her outside the monarchy's next chapter. Sophie then learned the schedule changes were only the beginning. Briefing papers, charitable correspondence, and access to advanced planning meetings had also been narrowed. Catherine was not merely appearing less. Her authority was being quietly redefined. Yet the tension might still have remained hidden had one ceremonial event not forced all three women into the same room. The palace could disguise missing invitations and rewritten schedules, but it could not erase what happened during the reception that became the point of no return. The true beginning of the confrontation came 5 days earlier beneath the chandeliers of a Windsor reception. Guests saw polished smiles, careful bows, and flawless royal ceremony. They did not see Catherine being quietly instructed to surrender her place in the receiving line, or Sophie watching from only a few feet away as one deliberate decision transformed private tension into open betrayal. Catherine had spent days preparing for the Windsor Community Leadership Reception. She had reviewed the work of every invited organization, rewritten her remarks by hand, and treated the occasion as a vital step back into public duty. A receiving line is the formal order in which royal figures greet arriving guests, and standing beside Charles would have signaled that she remained central to the monarchy's public future. Minutes before the doors opened, Camilla's private secretary approached and told her that position was no longer hers. Catherine did not argue. She folded the pages, passed them to an aide, and moved quietly toward the secondary place assigned to her. Sophie had arrived early to greet regional charity representatives farther along the line, yet she saw every second of it. The trusted confidant watched the princess absorb the humiliation without protest, and that composure made the moment harder to bear. Catherine had prepared to return with confidence. Instead, she was being reduced before the first guest even entered. Camilla arrived moments later and behaved as though nothing had changed. She took the principal position beside the king, adjusted her stance, and acknowledged Catherine's restrained smile with a brief nod. No explanation followed. Sophie then heard the private secretary tell another aide that the alteration came directly from the Queen Consort and was intended to establish a clearer order of authority, the internal ranking that determined who stood where and whose role carried greater weight. The words stayed with Sophie throughout the reception. Catherine greeted guests warmly, listened to their stories, and hid the pain behind practiced calm. Camilla received the attention of the central position, yet the trusted confidant could no longer see the evening as ceremony. She saw a warning. One woman's return was being weakened, so another could feel secure. Sophie found Catherine alone in a side corridor after the final guest had departed. The princess admitted during their private conversation that this was the third time that month she had discovered a reduced role only minutes before an event. On a nearby console table, her folded remarks remained untouched. Sophie opened them, saw handwritten notes filling the margins, and understood how much care had been dismissed without a word. "You will not face this alone again." That promise drove Sophie to trace the altered schedules, locate the memorandum, and request the meeting where restraint would finally collapse. When Sophie entered Camilla's sitting room with the evidence in her hand, she was no longer asking for an explanation. She was demanding an end to the campaign. For several seconds, neither woman moved. Then Sophie pushed the memorandum across the table and shattered years of royal restraint with one sentence: "You will not push her aside again." Camilla's expression hardened. The meeting was no longer about a reception, a schedule, or palace procedure. It had become a direct battle over Catherine's dignity and the future balance of power. Sophie refused the chair offered to her. She remained standing while the Queen stayed seated, forcing the confrontation to stretch across the narrow table like a challenge neither could escape. The trusted confidant described the removed engagements, restricted briefing papers, redirected correspondence, and the Windsor reception in exact order. A sovereign's household is the official team serving the reigning monarch, and Camilla argued that such a structure needed discipline, control, and clear authority during Catherine's return. Camilla insisted that nothing had been personal. She called the changes necessary coordination and accused Sophie of turning routine decisions into betrayal. Yet the woman opposite her would not accept that defense. The princess had returned during a vulnerable period, carrying public expectation and private uncertainty at the same time. Weakening her then did more than alter a schedule. It threatened her confidence, her influence, and her place in the monarchy's future. Sophie leaned forward and accused the queen consort of using Catherine's vulnerability to build an authority that would collapse the moment William became king. The words struck hard. Camilla's restraint finally broke. She declared that she had spent years being judged, excluded, and treated as temporary. She would not accept lectures about cruelty from someone protected by affection, trust, and an easier place inside the family. The trusted confidant answered with the truth Camilla had not expected. Catherine had never asked for this confrontation. She had issued no private instruction, made no secret appeal, and demanded no defense. Sophie had acted alone, after witnessing the reception and reading the written order with her own eyes. That documented instruction had made silence impossible. Camilla lowered her voice and delivered a warning. Challenging the Queen could cost Sophie future responsibilities, access to major royal events, and the trusted place she held beside Charles. For one moment, the woman standing before her felt her hands tremble. Then she placed both palms flat against the table. No role is worth keeping if silence requires Catherine's humiliation. The threat had failed. The meeting had become something larger than either woman could control. Outside the room, another copy of the memorandum was already moving through the palace, carrying the conflict toward the two men whose judgment would decide where the real authority stood. As Sophie and Camilla faced each other in Windsor, William opened the copied memorandum, and Charles was forced to choose between protecting his wife and confronting what she had done. Power inside the monarchy rarely announces itself with raised voices. Sometimes it appears in a signature withheld, a phone call unanswered, or a king sitting silently with a document before him. When Charles read the memorandum linking Camilla to Catherine's reduced role, he understood that defending his wife could ignite a direct rupture with William, and silence suddenly became his most dangerous choice. William received the copied memorandum through his private office and moved quickly. He ordered staff to verify every altered engagement, every missing briefing paper, and every decision that had crossed from one household into another. A private office is the small official team that manages a senior royal's duties, correspondence, and decisions. And within an hour, that team produced a timeline showing the same pattern repeated again and again. The prince sent the evidence directly to Charles with a message stripped of anger but heavy with warning. Catherine's constitutional and charitable role could not be changed by another household without consultation. Those duties mattered because they shaped public trust, protected long-standing causes, and defined the place she would hold beside the future king. William's anger remained controlled, but his deepest frustration came from knowing she had endured the changes quietly to avoid adding pressure to her father-in-law. Charles read the file alone. He removed his glasses, placed them on the desk, and said nothing while an aide waited nearby. The king's face shifted from confusion to exhaustion as the timeline revealed something worse than schedule interference. Camilla's office had tried to redirect two of Catherine's established charitable initiatives into a central palace structure controlled by the Queen's team. A household review, meaning a formal internal examination of how royal staff made and approved decisions, could no longer be avoided. The monarch understood his wife's fear. She had spent years facing hostility, doubt, and the sense that her place could always be questioned. Yet defending her now would look like approval of Catherine's deliberate weakening. It would also place him against William at the exact moment the monarchy needed unity between the present reign and the next. Camilla entered expecting support. Charles slid the transfer papers across the desk, leaving the signature line blank, and said only, "This cannot proceed." She stared at the page, then at him. The Queen Consort understood immediately. He had frozen every pending change and chosen restraint over her defense. The decision stopped the transfer, but it did not end the conflict. It triggered accusations, staff resignations, and a private fury that would soon move beyond the room. The unsigned page ended Camilla's plan in a single moment, but what followed exposed how many people had already been pulled into the struggle. By the following morning, the confrontation was no longer contained within one sitting room. Meetings disappeared from calendars. Staff members requested transfers. Locked folders were reopened, and Catherine's name returned to engagements from which it had quietly vanished. Yet behind the sudden correction stood a far more painful reality. Camilla had lost control of the machinery she believed was protecting her position. Charles moved first. He ordered Catherine's original engagements restored and suspended every cross-household schedule change that lacked written approval from William's office. Cross-household scheduling is the process by which separate royal teams coordinate duties between senior family members, and control over it can shape who appears, who speaks, and who carries public authority. Two senior members of Camilla's team were removed from the joint planning group, while officials examined how the Windsor reception decision had been approved. Camilla received the revised schedule alone at breakfast. She read the first page, placed it beside her untouched coffee, and dismissed the waiting footman with a voice barely above a whisper. The Queen Consort had expected anger to sustain her. Instead, fear settled in. Sophie had challenged her, Charles had refused to defend her, and Catherine's restored authority now threatened the influence she had fought so hard to build. Sophie felt the consequences almost immediately. Courtiers who once greeted her warmly began looking away, and one long-planned engagement vanished from her calendar without explanation. The trusted confidant recognized the warning for what it was. Camilla had told her that resistance would carry a price, and now that price was becoming real. A private secretary then disclosed the next move through a documented internal note. The Queen had requested a written account of Sophie's access to Catherine's household, suggesting she was preparing to question whether the trusted confidant had crossed an official line. The request was not yet an accusation, but it carried the shape of one. William answered before the pressure could deepen. He invited Sophie to a private meeting and thanked her directly for protecting Catherine when others had remained silent. The prince made clear that her actions had prevented a larger fracture, and his support gave her something Camilla had tried to take away: security. Catherine learned that her engagements had been restored while reviewing correspondence at home. She closed her eyes, pressed the message against the table, and asked one question before anything else: is Sophie safe from retaliation? That concern changed the next step. Catherine no longer wanted a formal briefing or another carefully managed exchange. She wanted the woman who had defended her to understand that the sacrifice had been seen. With the palace still shaking from the fallout, Catherine and Sophie met without aides, titles, or prepared statements, and their conversation changed the meaning of the entire conflict. There were no officials in the room when Catherine finally faced Sophie. No briefing notes, No carefully arranged chairs. Only two women carrying the weight of everything that had happened. Sophie expected gratitude, perhaps relief. Instead, Catherine asked a question that stopped her cold. "What did standing up for me cost you?" In that moment, the battle ceased to be about status. Catherine had asked both households to remain outside before closing the Windsor sitting room door herself. A royal household is the official team that manages a senior family member's duties, staff, correspondence, and public work. But neither woman wanted that machinery between them now. The princess had seen the memorandum, the restored schedule, and the documented account of the confrontation. She knew Sophie had risked years of trust without ever being asked. Sophie answered slowly. She admitted that losing Charles's confidence frightened her, and that isolation inside the family had already begun. Courtiers had turned away. An engagement had vanished. Camilla's warning no longer felt theoretical, yet the trusted confidant confessed that silence would have cost something greater. Watching Catherine surrender piece after piece of her authority would have damaged her conscience in a way no lost duty ever could. Catherine lowered her eyes. She had believed that absorbing humiliation quietly would protect the family from conflict, but that silence had only moved the pain outward. William had been forced into a battle she wanted to avoid, and Sophie had placed her own position in danger. The princess finally understood that peace, built on one person's suffering, was not peace at all. Sophie then revealed through their private conversation that the Windsor reception had not been the only trigger. She had also seen Catherine's charitable correspondence redirected before it reached her desk. Those letters mattered because they connected the princess directly to organizations that depended on her support, and controlling them meant controlling which causes received her attention. Catherine reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. She offered no grand promise of protection or influence. Her voice remained quiet. "You reminded me that dignity is not something I have to surrender to preserve peace." That sentence became a decision. Catherine prepared a written framework, giving her office direct authority over engagements and patronages, the long-term charities formally supported by a royal figure. She would no longer allow silence to be mistaken for consent. Before Sophie left, the princess unfolded the speech removed from the reception. Handwritten notes still covered its margins. She asked the trusted confidant to help choose another occasion for its delivery. Their alliance would not remain private for long. The first public sign of their alliance appeared not in an official statement, but in one carefully arranged royal appearance that transformed private resistance into a national story. The palace issued no confession and named no confrontation. It did not need to. When Catherine stepped from the car at the Royal Foundation, gathering with Sophie walking beside her, the image crossed Britain within minutes. Their expressions were calm, their pace measured, but the message was unmistakable. Catherine had returned, Sophie had chosen her side, and Camilla's private intervention had failed. Catherine knew the appearance would be watched closely. The Royal Foundation is the charitable organization supporting major projects led by William and his wife, and appearing there placed her firmly back at the center of public duty. Sophie stayed beside her from the entrance onward, not behind her and not at a careful distance. That simple choice mattered because it turned private loyalty into something the palace could no longer hide. Rain fell steadily outside Buckingham Palace as crowds gathered near large television screens replaying their arrival. Several people held white roses, and the flowers quickly became a symbol of support for the two women. The public had not seen the memorandum or heard the confrontation, but it understood the emotion. One figure had been pushed aside. Another had refused to let it continue. Sophie maintained her composure through every greeting, yet the attention unsettled her. She knew viewers now saw her as the woman who had challenged Camilla, and that identity carried both admiration and risk. The trusted confidant had acted to protect Catherine, not to become the center of a national drama. Still, the reaction showed that silence inside the palace had never meant indifference outside it. Catherine then delivered the speech removed from the Windsor reception. Every line carried greater force, because the audience now knew it had once been denied to her. When she finished, the princess stepped away from the lectern and allowed Sophie to walk beside her rather than behind her. The gesture lasted only seconds, but broadcasters replayed it throughout the evening. Camilla watched part of the coverage privately. The queen consort remained still, as the camera captured Catherine and the trusted confidant exchanging a quiet smile. Before the applause ended, she switched off the television. The image confirmed what the unsigned transfer papers had already warned her. The authority she tried to control had moved beyond her reach. Charles made the change official soon afterward. He authorized a revised household protocol, meaning a written set of rules governing how royal offices work together, confirming that Catherine's engagements and patronages could not be altered without approval from her own team. The following morning, one national newspaper printed a full-width photograph beneath the headline, "United at Last, the women who stood their ground." Once the applause faded and the palace doors closed again, each woman was left to face the final truth about what had been gained and what could never be restored. The confrontation did not remove Camilla from the monarchy, nor did it erase the wounds that had brought Sophie to her door. But it ended something equally important: the belief that Catherine could be quietly diminished without resistance. One woman had spoken, another had found her voice, and a third had discovered that authority maintained through fear could vanish the moment silence was broken. Charles made the final boundary unmistakable. The household review permanently restored Catherine's control over her schedule, speeches, charitable correspondence, and patronages, the organizations and causes officially supported by a senior royal. The king informed Camilla that her office would continue managing her own responsibilities, but it would no longer approve, delay, or reshape Catherine's public role. The decision protected the future princess's authority and prevented one household from quietly controlling another. Camilla received the written decision in the same Windsor room where Sophie had challenged her. She sat alone for several minutes, touched the edge of the table, and stared at the place where the memorandum had rested. The queen consort retained her title and duties, yet she understood the deeper loss. The influence she had tried to protect had been reduced by the very pressure used to preserve it. Sophie did not leave the conflict untouched. Her relationship with Camilla became distant, and some courtiers never forgave the trusted confidant for breaking the palace's habit of silence. Yet Charles continued to respect her, because she had confronted the danger before it became an open rupture. William also saw her differently. The prince no longer viewed her as merely a dependable supporting figure, but as someone prepared to defend the monarchy's future, when doing so carried a personal cost. Catherine changed as well. She stopped treating silence as the price of family unity, and returned to her responsibilities with firm boundaries. The princess now understood that loyalty did not always arrive through official offices, formal documents, or carefully controlled meetings. Sometimes it arrived through one person willing to enter a closed room and speak the truth. Weeks later, Catherine delivered the restored Windsor speech at a smaller gathering. Sophie listened from the front row. When the applause began, the two women exchanged a quiet nod. There was no public celebration and no display of victory, only recognition of what each had endured. Sophie's confrontation had not been rebellion against the crown. It had been loyalty to what the crown claimed to represent: service, dignity, restraint, and responsibility. Camilla kept her position, but lost the power to shape Catherine's future from behind closed doors. The trusted confidant sacrificed comfort to defend principle. The princess reclaimed her voice. And the monarchy survived, not because everyone remained silent, but because one woman finally refused to do so. The door that closed on Sophie and Camilla's confrontation eventually reopened, But the monarchy that emerged through it was no longer governed by fear, hidden instructions, or unquestioned silence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.